Right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, what a reception. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Marsh, steady on, calm down, settle down. Welcome to the FCC. It's great to have you all here on a Friday night. It's very rare we do a big event on a Friday night, and we only do it if we know it's going to be really valuable, it's going to be a sellout, and so we're absolutely delighted to finally, because this has taken 4 years.
4 years of planning and global pandemics and what have you.
So we're delighted to finally welcome Tony Parsons to the FCC.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
The crowd's on your side, mate. This is going to be easy.
That's good, yes.
Okay.
It's much easier than question time. Yeah.
Yes, well, we'll get on to that. So, Tony, right, welcome to the FCC. And greengrocer's son from Essex, worked in a gin factory, and then you got the job that millions of young people wanted, which was being a reporter on New Musical Express, at the heart of that manic period in the 70s. So, what was it? Was it the music or the writing that came first? How did it all start?
I think it started with my parents not being able to conceive very easily. I think they both came from huge families. My mum had 6 brothers. My dad had 8 sisters and 2 brothers. They came from these huge, great, sprawling London families, and they married when they were teenagers, and they were banging away for years without any noticeable results. And they were not very old, but they were like 26, 27, and they gave up. They thought, because there wasn't a lot of help or understanding about it, and my dad loved 3 things really. He loved my mum, he loved motorbikes, and he loved Italy, because he fought in Italy. He fought his way up. Italy was involved in the invasion of Sicily, Anzio, Monte Cassino, Elba, all that. But he loved Italy. He spoke Italian very well, and we used to say he learned it in bed, as the saying goes. I think he was quite partial to a farmer's daughter in Sicily. But anyway, they couldn't have a baby, so they were going to go. He'd fought his way from the south of Italy to about halfway north, and they were going to do it in the other direction on their motorbike, with nobody shooting at him this time. And she got pregnant. Then my mum got pregnant, and I think because they'd tried for so long, they both had very clear ideas of what they wanted from their child. You know, my dad wanted me to be a tough guy because he was a tough guy, and my mum just wanted to sit me on her lap and read me Rupert the Bear stories, you know. And so my dad bought me this. My dad wasn't really a tough guy. My dad was a killer. He wasn't in a land of hard men and tough guys. He was something else. But he wanted me to be tough. So he bought me this. It wasn't really a toy. It was like a bit of training equipment for kids. It was like a thin wooden board with a punch bag on it, and you stood on it, and you had to stand in your correct boxing stance because it was so thin, and you punched this ball, and it came back and hit you in the face. And I thought, well, bugger this. I think I prefer Rupert the Bear, you know. So I spent, you know, my childhood sitting on my mum's lap being read Rupert the Bear stories, and I just fell in love with stories. I just fell in love with the possibility of stories, and it came from that, you know, the idea of writing and the idea of telling stories for a living. I think it comes to you quite young when you're transformed by stories and by the magic of stories. So that's where it really began.
And so then you start working at the gin factory, but you wanted to write. So, New Musical Express, a lot of people wanting to go and write there. How did you get to the top of the pile there?
Well, I when I was 16 and I knew that I wanted to write, I mean, I had I'm old enough to remember the 1966 World Cup final, so I was like football crazy. And I had a trial with Chelsea when I was 15, and the moment it kicked off, I knew I was never going to be good enough. I just knew that I was never going to be good enough. And there were kids there from Ireland and Scotland and Wales. You know, I mean, today they'd be from Korea and the Ivory Coast and Argentina. But as soon as it kicked off, I knew you're never going to be anywhere near good enough for this. You better stick to the writing and stick to the stories. And I wrote to 100 people, just writers, TV presenters, completely inappropriate people, journalists that I admired, and said, "What do I do? Where do I go? I've got no contacts. I know absolutely no one. If I want to write for a living, what do I do?" And it was literally 100 people, and one person wrote back to me, and that was Keith Waterhouse. And he's not a famous name, Keith Waterhouse, but he's always been my role model. He wrote a novel called Billy Liar, and he wrote a play called Geoffrey Barnard is Unwell, and he wrote brilliant columns for the Mirror and later the Daily Mail. And he just did everything, And I always wanted that. I always wanted that because the world is so quick to put labels on us and put us in a box that we shouldn't do it to ourselves, I thought. And he was the one person who wrote back to me. And he said, "Dear Tony, get an agent. Love, Keith." And so I thought, well, okay, Mr. Waterhouse says get an agent. I better get an agent. But an agent needs something to sell. An agent needs some product. So I started, when I worked in this Gordon's Gin factory in Islington, on the City Road in Islington, which was a nightmarish existence where they would bring 2 cases of gin into this little bare room, like something out of Guantanamo Bay, every night, and the commuters, the office workers, would knock back their gin. And
is that their job?
No, their job was beavering away for the greater glory of Gordon's Gin. But we would just sit in this bare little room. But me and my colleagues, we were on the night shift, and we used to come in. We used to drink all these awful, Tizer and Tab, and we used to just get completely rat-faced and then go to work. And while my colleagues were sleeping it off, I'd be tapping away at my book. And it took me a year to write the book. It took me a year to find an agent. It took the agent a year to find a publisher. So by the time the book came out, and it wasn't a very good book, but it did get published. And it was called The Kids, and it got published, and I was 21. So when the NME advertised for writers, everybody sent their little typewritten manuscript, their little biro scrawlings, and I sent them my book. And, none of them had published a book up there, in 1976, and they still haven't, funny enough. So it was quite impressive, and you didn't need to read the book. You didn't need to know if it was a good book or not. This 21-year-old kid from Billericay, in a cheap leather jacket, has had a book published. So
you were in.
Better give him a job. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was a pretty crazy time being a 21-year-old music writer. I mean, your book, the novel Stories We Could Tell, is very autobiographical, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my most autobiographical novel.
Right, and which, for those who haven't read it, tells the story of 3 young music journalists going around London on the night that Elvis died. Brilliant read. Now, the power that those young journalists had, I mean, New Musical Express had a circulation of 300,000. So there's an enormous amount of influence. And you managed to break into it, but it does seem, those early years, it was a life of mayhem. But you managed to get some serious writing done.
Yeah, I'm not sure I did get serious writing done. I don't think I improved as a writer at the NME. I mean, I think that I was in an incredibly privileged position, but there was no time to give me any training. You were shoved out on the road with bands. My beat was the new bands like the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Jam and the Stranglers.
They were pretty
Blondie,
difficult to interview, aren't they?
Well, I used to see them every night. I used to see them down the Roxy every night. They were so the bands that were my generation that I was meant to cover. They were not, they were struggling young musicians. They were not. They didn't have record contracts. None of them. Debbie Harry, Paul Weller, Johnny Rotten, none of them had record contracts. I knew them for a year. I'd watch them playing for a year. I'd be, the ones that I was close to, like the Jam, I would help them carry their kit into empty gigs. So, that was, and they were not so different because they were like me. It was like they'd landed in this world. They'd pushed the door open at the back of the wardrobe, and stepped into rock and roll Narnia. But they were recognisably kids like the kids that I knew at school. The older guys that were around at the time, like the really old guys, like the Rolling Stones, they were only kind of 31, 32, and the early stuff that I wrote, I remember my first cover story was about Keith Richards. It's a very sweet picture of Mick, Keith, and me peering over Keith's shoulder when he had a drugs trial. Keith drove his Bentley into a ditch near Aylesbury, and there were some suspicious substances were found about his person. What were the odds of that? Incredible. And anyway, so Keith rocked up at this little jailhouse, little Crown Court in Aylesbury, and I was like dispatched. You go and cover this, and and it was a fantastic experience to be down there, and like Jagger turned up to support him, and it was just a really, really wonderful experience, and to see those older guys, and we thought of them as the really old guys, but we thought.
Did they give you any advice? Some of those big bands. I mean, you mentioned about Phil Lynott.
Yeah, but Thin Lizzy were one of the older groups, and they were very enemy friendly, and Phil Lynott was a very smart guy, and he saw the power of having the enemy on his side, and he was a sweet guy. He was a good guy. I mean, total rock and roll animal, a complete party man, but with a sweet, thoughtful, caring, smart guy. And Thin Lizzy were the first band that I went on the road with in the UK, and they were the first band I went on the road with in America. And Phil, and really, when I started, I really didn't know what I was doing at all. I really had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was sent to interview the women in Fleetwood Mac, and Stevie Nicks and Christine McVie, and I just didn't really know. And so they just gave me breakfast, and they'd had a very, very rough night. They'd had Christine and Stevie had a very, very rough night, and they were, can we got any Cocoa Pops, And I was like, it was a curious. I just didn't realise I didn't know what I was meant to do, and Phil Lynott sat me down. We were in some horrible Holiday Inn, I think in Leicester, and the bands always started their tours in Leicester, the De Montfort Hall. And Phil sat me down and said, look, it's really it's gonna be quite rough the next few days. You're gonna be staying up all night. It's gonna be drink. There's gonna be drugs. There's gonna be girls. Might even be a little bit of rock and roll. And you're gonna feel. I know you think you're a cocky, young buck from Billericay, but you're gonna be burned out very, very fast. We had a bottle of vodka on our, all-you-can-eat buffet. So Phil's saying, listen to me, young man, pouring me vodka. He's saying, we were drinking vodka. He said, we've got to have orange juice in our vodka. This is like 8 o'clock in the morning. He says, because orange juice is full of vitamin C. So that will stop us catching colds. And so it's really important that if you're drinking vodka at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's really important you have orange juice in it. Good health
Sound
tip
advice.
from Phil. Yeah, from Phil. Yeah.
So moving on from that particular era, then we moved into the 80s, and it was, punk society got left behind, and that was when you wrote the biography of George Michael, who, I mean, at a very young age to have a biography written about it.
Well, I left the NME after 3 while. I mean, I was 22 when I started, and 25 when I left, and I was completely, you were burned out after 3 years. You just were completely burned out. It was hard going, and some people didn't survive. And you're lucky to come out alive, really. And there was, when you were in that world of the NME, you felt as though you were at the centre of something important. We sold so many, our circulation, as you say, was like 300,000. National newspapers would be happy to have those circulating. But you stepped outside of that world, and nobody knew who you were. Nobody cared. The Director General of the BBC didn't know who you were. The editor of the Times didn't know who you were. The NME was a real kind of very privileged youth girl. I remember Freddie Mercury said to a colleague of mine, Tony Stewart, when he went to interview him once, he said, "Oh, darling, still working at the NME? I thought you'd be editor of the Times by now. And the reason we all enjoyed that quote from Freddie is because we knew that there was actually no chance of us ever getting a job at even the best of us were just kind of unwanted and unknown, and we're just in this little wild rock and roll world for as long as it lasted. And when it was over, you know, I had 10 tough years, 10 tough wilderness years, just doing, I mean, good things came out of it. You know, I had friends working, it was big boom time for magazines, and I had a friend called Louise Chun who worked for Elle magazine, and she used to get me to write a male perspective of stuff. You know, she used to say, you know, commitment. What do men think about commitment? And I did a let's get Tony. Let's ask Tony. And so I was like the token male writer, and I realised I enjoy writing about this stuff. I like writing about relationships. I like writing about men and women, and you know, parents and children. I enjoyed writing about that stuff. And Louise got me embedded with, well, what do men think about pornography? You know, Louise got me embedded with the Vice Squad in West End Central. And I later wrote a detective series, which is set in West End Central, and it kind of starts there. But it was really, you know, the freelance lifestyle, just kind of scratching a living, waiting for things to turn up. You know, in many ways, it was a good time because it was like boom period for travel writing, and so I came to Hong Kong. You know, my relationship with Hong Kong began in those years. But I was doing little bits and pieces for The Face, which my old editor, Nick Logan at the NME, started. And he said, you know, go and interview George Michael of Wham. And it was kind of the boom period for Wham. And I went to interview George and got on with him really well. And went out with him. We went to this... I mean, it was very famous then, but it wasn't on the level that it became. But he was very approachable, and we went to a restaurant that I was fond of at the time called Rutland and Stubbs, which was an oyster restaurant in Smithfield. And he had a car waiting outside. And he was a pop star already, with girls chasing him down the street. But I wrote the first really, I mean, fun but serious. I took him seriously. It was the first interview where someone had you know, treated him as though perhaps he had a major songwriting talent. Perhaps he was going to be, you know, around for a while. You know, perhaps he wasn't just fluff and, you know.
And you could see the genius.
Yeah,
at that point.
Yeah, I could see the talent, and I also just got on with him. You know, I just got on with him, and there were, you know, and you don't get on with everybody, and it was a bit different because, you know, the guys that I'd hung around with and spent time with and stayed up all night with. Mostly, although I did get sent out to talk to the older guys like Mick and Keith and Tin Lizzy, they were mostly my generation. You know, the Pistols and the Jam and the Clash. They were my generation, and they were guys that I could have been at school with. But George was the first person I met, and he was 10 years younger than me. But I really liked him, and I just thought he was a smart guy, and I did a couple of pieces on him. And I said to him, and as I say, I was really, you know, I was absolutely, I remember I made like one year, the year I first came to Hong Kong, I made £4,000. And I came to Hong Kong, and I went to a bar in Hong Kong, and the bill was £4,000. So I think I must have had an extra Scotch egg that night in Wan Chai, that crazy night in Wan Chai. So I thought, wow, you just spent your entire year's salary on a bar, and in Hong Kong, you better never come here again because you'll only get in trouble. So I was scrabbling around, and I said to him, and I liked it. I liked George Michael, and I got on well with him. And I said to him, you know, one day, and I literally meant when he was 60. I said, one day we should do your book. We should do your book. And I think he was kind of like, he was about 25 at the time. And it just really, his first solo album had exploded. He had like 8 US #1 singles. So suddenly, probably at that point, he was the biggest star in the world. At that point, I think there were 8 #1 US singles came off of that first solo album. And I said, we'll do that one day. And I really learned a lot from George about managing a career. You know, he said, no, we'll do it now. He said, because there's 8 planned biographies of me. He says, there's 8 books out there that I know of that are planned now. And he said, if we do it, kill them all stone dead, kill them all stone dead. So we did, and it was a very, he's the great shrine to George now that is in Highgate. But before he lived in Highgate, he lived in Hampstead, and that's where I used to go and see him. And I just used to go around there, once a week working on our book and deciding what it would be, deciding what it would look like. And really, it was a ploy. It was like a ploy for him to kill off all these books that we didn't want out there. He didn't want unauthorized books out there. He thought if we did an authorized book, although it's ludicrous and crazy to write a life story when your life has just begun, but he wanted to do it, and he wanted to do it for his own reasons, and they were actually sound reasons, because he wanted to keep ownership. I got to know him very well, and one day I was leaving. I said, we're going to have to work out, because every publisher wanted it. Every publisher wanted George's official book. And I said, we have to work out what we're going to do with the money. And he said, 50-50. So I said, yeah, good. And shook hands on it.
A few people who've written books here going, huh?
And this was a big book, and I'd never really had a big payday in my life, until then. I was really scrambling around. And my agent said to me, they're not holding it. His two managers, two LA lawyers, he said they're just not agreeing to it. He said, I think they're really angry about it, that we think that we can do this deal. And my agent went for lunch with one of them, and he said there were two meetings before me. There was a meeting. The guy had a meeting for the starter, and he had a meeting for the entree. And my agent said, I was dessert. I was dessert. He said they're not gonna do it. He said, we can give Tony, 50 grand, and it'll be the best payday that he's ever had. And he'll only blow it in a bar in Hong Kong anyway. So I said to George when I saw him, I said, your managers they don't like the deal that we've got. And he said, you don't even have to think about it again. Just don't have to think about it again. I'll sort it, And he did, and it was never mentioned again, And I just saw the power of someone that knows their own worth, and the idea that a couple of LA hotshot lawyers were going to tell him what my cut was when he'd already shook hands on it was just anathema to him. It was just ridiculous. So we were very close, and we had. I look back. We fell out. We fell out later because we had they wanted his people. I was like the trusted journalist. I was the journalist that could go to his house and spend a day with him, and I was trusted. And I met his mom, and he met my family, and we and I think I think of it as being like a mutually beneficial relationship. He was the superstar that I had an in with, and I was the journalist that he trusted, and I think we weren't really friends. It was more like a business relationship. But when I think back, the night before my wife and I got married in 1992, we went out to a little Japanese restaurant called Nishiko in Islington in North London, and George came with us, and it was just like the three of us. And so I think, well, we must have had a deeper relationship than that. But we fell out when I was writing Man and Boy, and it was really. I thought this could be my big book. This could be my shot, shot at the top. And these people saying, oh, yeah, there's a Wham compilation out, and we really want a bit of publicity. And I said, Wham compilation. I've got, I'm writing the great British novel here, and you're talking about, Wake Me Up Before She Go remixes. And they said, no, go round, just go round there and see. George would love to see, all the flannel that they give you, the flattery, and it is, with someone that's that famous, it is, you are in their court, really. You are, and you might be, you might be a favoured courtier, or you might be, out of favour. But, you're in or out, and I was definitely in. So I went round there, and we just, we talked. And he understood that he was doing it because they had a record out, and he probably wanted Andrew to get a few bob, because he was never going to see a big payday again, and I was working I just started work for the Mirror, for Piers Morgan at the Mirror, and And I called Piers up and I said, I just spent 6 hours with George Michael. Piers Morgan said, say that again. I said, I just spent 6 hours with George Michael. Talks about drugs, Diana, it's a pretty good piece. He said, send me the tapes. So I sent Piers the tapes. He said, okay. And they knew that they wanted this publicity, but they didn't want it filtered through Piers Morgan. They didn't want it filtered through Piers' eyes lighting up, And but inevitably that happened. He said, okay. Piers said, right, well, incredible, world exclusive. We've got world exclusive. You brought a world exclusive. He said, I'm thinking. Piers said, I'm thinking. And Piers was a fantastic editor, a brilliant editor. And George was a good guy, but it's like these two worlds colliding, Yeah. Piers said, I could just see it tomorrow. My Drug Hell by George Michael, and George is suddenly calling me up and saying, all that stuff I said about Diana, and he really liked Princess Diana. George Michael really liked her, but he said, she, her popularity would have, if she had stayed with this Muslim playboy, her popularity would have dipped. She wasn't going to stay at that level, and he was someone who, who had a PhD in fame. George Michael understood fame, understood how it can ebb and flow. He knew that when he stopped touring, when he stopped making pop records, his fame, his star would drop. He knew that. And he said, can we take that out? And he'd say, he just really started taking drugs. The irony is that his drug hell came later. That's the irony, And he said, can we take out the drugs and the drugs, just the drug stuff. Just take some of it, just tone it down, because my dad, and I just think of, and he was, we sat and talked like two friends. Really, talked like two friends. And then you suddenly realise that your friend is going to, write the words in, letters of flaming fire above your grandmother's grave, and so you're thinking, maybe I should have been a bit more discreet. So we kind of had a falling out of it, because I said, look, you got to let me do my job. I'm a journalist, and your people begged me to come around and do this, to put aside. So we had a fight, but he did fall out with everybody. But I look back on him with enormous affection, and he was a lovely guy, and I learned a lot from him.
He was clearly a deeply troubled person. I mean, you wrote a piece after his mother died.
Yeah.
About how after he died.
Yeah.
About how important his mother had been to him, and she was a sort of rock.
Yeah, I mean, I met his mum when she used to go round and do his housekeeping, because he couldn't really have a regular housekeeper. He was too famous, because we would look out of the window, and his house was this big modern pile in Hampstead, and it looked down a hill, and you'd look down a hill and you'd see photographers crawling through the undergrowth, hoping to get a picture of George in his pants or something, and so the pressures on him and the interest in him was so overwhelming that that he kept his family close, his mum and his two sisters, and I think he was undone by that. But I think he was also undone by, I knew a lot of people, including Phil Lynott, who killed themselves with drugs, and I think that in my wise old age, I think that drugs are always a dead end, and I don't speak as any kind of saint, because when I was at the NME, there was drugs absolutely everywhere, from morning till night, and then round to the next morning. There were drugs absolutely everywhere, and but I think they're always a dead end. But I think that you can't, if you're going to do them, it's got to be over by the time you're 25. It's just got to be. It's not something that you can do at a later age. And he just had, he had so much money. He had so much money. I can remember he was very down to earth. In some ways, he was very down to earth, because he was, he'd take his dog Hippie, this golden retriever, take her over Hampstead Heath every day in his Range Rover. He said, I got this. He said, I got this, but I never use it. And he opened his garage door, and it's this brand new Aston Martin, which he never drove. He said, I don't really know what to do with it. Like the Range Rover, it's kind of, and so he had a lot of time on his hands, and he had a lot of money in the bank. And when you reach that level of fame, I remember seeing a documentary with Elton John, Tantrums and Tiaras, which I'm in. I'm in the opening sequence, and his husband, his boyfriend at the time, said to Elton, if it was all over, if you lost all your money, and Elton saying that can't happen. He said, no, but if you did lose all, and he said, no, but that can't happen. And it's true that you get to a certain level of fame, and you can always go back on the road and put another 30 million in the bank. You can always do that if you achieve that level of fame. And George did that. So George knew that, you know, he could sit around for a number of years, but then take the show on the road. And he's just, you know, he was smoking very powerful stuff. Too late in life, he had too much time on his hands, and you know, I personally think that he would have preferred. He became a great guy icon. He is a great gay icon, but I think he would have. My personal suspicion is that he would have preferred to keep his private life quiet.
Right.
You know, for all sorts of reasons. But I think he would have just preferred to keep it. But when he was, you know, found messing about with a policeman's truncheon in LA, and it all came out. Then, smart guy that he was, he decided, well, I'll have dancing policemen in my video, you know, to make a joke of it, and so he, you know, turned it to his advantage. But it was, you know, it's tragic what happened to him, because he was a lovely guy, and in that generation, you know, that 80s generation of, you know, George, Michael Jackson, Prince, they're not made of the same kind of resilient stuff. You know, you look at
Keith Richards.
Yeah, look at Keith. You know, look at Keith and Jagger. You know, and they're just and they've done it all and more. You know, they've done it all and more. Yeah.
You mentioned it was Piers Morgan who sent you around to see George, and you spent a lot of time at the Mirror.
No, he didn't send me around. He knew nothing about it. Yeah, I was doing him a favour going around.
And I mean, he's quite a polarising character.
Yeah. No, I've got a lot of time for him. I love the guy, and I used to, in my wilderness years, I'd write this little music column for the Telegraph, you know, explaining to them who, you know, Snoop Doggy Dogg was, and you know who Joe Strummer had been, and you know, and also, and you know, and there are a lot of kind of older people that are into rock music. You know, there are plenty of, you know, 85-year-old Dylan fans. And I used to do this little column in the Telegraph, just kind of thinking, you know, this is when will something good happen? When will something good happen? When will I make some money? When will I make enough money to go back into another Hong Kong bar? But when that a columnist called Peregrine Worsthorne. So Peregrine Worsthorne, it was sort of like high Tory, old school. And when Perry, as I call him, was away, I stood in for him. And I wrote his column, you know, just like whatever you want, write whatever you want. And one of those columns. And there's a guy called Charlie Wilson who's really, you know, did a lot of work for Rupert Murdoch and News UK. But at that time was managing director of the Mirror Group. And Charlie Wilson, who died this year, he was like tough old Scot. I mean, I absolutely cried my eyes out when he died, which he would have, you know, he would have pissed his pants, you know. He would have just laughed himself stupid to find that I was crying about him dying. But he was such a pivotal figure in my career. And he took me out and he said, "I love your column in Telegraph." He said you could be another Cassandra. You can write a newspaper column. You can write a mass market newspaper column like Cassandra. Now Cassandra is you know, this legendary Mirror columnist in the war, fell out with Churchill, fell out with the government, didn't think the Atlantic convoy had enough protection, thought men were dying needlessly. You know, real, you know, the Elvis of newspaper journalism in the UK. And he said, "I want you to go out with the editor of the Mirror and see if you get on. You know, see if you can agree with what, you know, the money, and you know, we'll take care of all that. But just see how you get on. And you know, I'd love to have you in there." So Charlie instructed the editor of the Mirror, whoever that was, to have lunch with me. So we went out with lunch, and this guy had absolutely no idea who I was. And it was kind of sort of, you know, and I thought, this doesn't feel like I should, it just doesn't feel like it'll last, you know? And my wife was always, "Do you really want to write for a red top tabloid? Won't that harm your reputation as a writer?" And I could see that point. Because if only that, you know, the establishment are not reading you, you know, they're reading you if you're in the Times, but maybe if you're in the Mirror or the Sun or the Mail, maybe they're not. But I went out with this guy and I thought, I'm not going to go and work for a guy who doesn't know. And it wasn't like, don't you know who I am? I went down the River Thames with the Sex Pistols on Jubilee Day, young man. You know, it wasn't that. It's just like a purely pragmatic, this is never going to last because this guy doesn't believe in me the way Charlie Wilson does. And I went out with about 4 or 5 Daily Mirror editors over a period of about 2 years because they kept sacking them. And then they had the youngest editor of the Daily in Fleet Street, which was the 29-year-old Piers Morgan. And Piers had grown up reading me, and Piers knew who I was. And Piers said, you know, how much money do you want? I told him, when can you start? Let's do it. And he wrote me a beautiful letter, which I've still got, about, you know, just how lucky we were to be writing for a national newspaper. And one of the high points of my career was we won at the Mirror with Piers Morgan as our editor. And he's not thought of as a serious journalist, but we won Newspaper of the Year for our 9/11 coverage. And you know, for a red top tabloid to be the Times, the Sunday Times, the Guardian, the Telegraph, in one of the, you know, probably the most important pivotal news event of the 21st century. And you were told
just to produce.
Yeah, well, he said to me, you know, we, you know, it was just one of those moments where someone says to you, turn on the TV, and you know, you look at it, and it's raw, unfiltered news. You know, that you're seeing things like people falling off the buildings that stopped after about 48 hours. You never see that anymore because it's too intrusive, it's too personal, it's too distressing. And you know, and I knew, and there were people celebrating in Finsbury Park because it was a blow against America and all this stuff, and you know, just the shock of watching mass murder unfold. And you know, twice Piers said to me, write what you like and we'll print it. Just write what you like and we'll print it. And that was one of those occasions. The other occasion was when my mum died, and I filed on Friday. My column was, I had to file on Friday, and I had to phone in to say, you know, I'm kind of my column may be delayed this week. And when I was speaking to Piers, the undertakers were literally bringing my mum's coffin down the stairs in this little semi-detached where I grew up in Billericay. And I said, you know, my mum just died, Piers. And he said, you know, take the week off. He said, you know, we have a heart. You know, you get the week off when your mum dies. And I said, well, I want to write something about it because I think I find it easier. I think I find it easier to deal with if I could write something about my mum and what she meant, and you know, just what a great woman she was, what a great mother she was. And he said, write what you like and we'll print it. And so those two, and really, you know, they're the things that a journalist wants here. Write what you like, we'll print it, and how much money do you want? They're the things that, as journalists, we love to hear.
Well, another polarising figure who you worked with when you were on GQ and who you also lived next door to was, of course, the beloved Boris Johnson. Now, I mean, like many, you had high hopes for him when he came in.
Yeah.
I mean, we all did. But it all crashed and burned. And I mean, and now we're seeing the COVID inquiry, and it really is just...
Well, Max Hastings, who was his editor at the Telegraph, and my editor too, always said that it would be a disaster if he became leader of the Tory party, if he became Prime Minister. I mean, Max Hastings always called it because he knew him, you know, and I always felt, I did feel that there was, because he was a journalist, he was a working journalist. When we were neighbours, he was a working journalist. And I always felt there was a degree of envy towards Boris because he'd, you know, had this stellar career. I mean, I first met him. We were on University Challenge. We were on rival teams on University Challenge. I was on, it was a Jeremy Paxman special, which was tabloids v broadsheets. And Boris was the captain of the broadsheet team. And I'd never, this is the first time I'd met him, and I'd never seen anyone so in need of attention, someone so craving of attention. You know, we had, you know, it was a traditional University Challenge where you had to introduce yourself. You know, Tony Parsons the Mirror, and he was like, Boris Johnson's here, reading. I don't know what I'm reading. What are you reading, Paxo, old sport? Oh, is that the buzzer? Oh, sorry, I thought it was the call for more sherry. Oh. And he was like, just like, thought, wow, what a dick. And And we were in Manchester. We shot it in Manchester, and he sat with me and Jay Moore on the train coming back. I mean, we absolutely annihilated them. We completely destroyed them. With
Tabloids,
the tabloids,
one hand
and it's really difficult to see that show. You know, I think it's been suppressed by MI6 because if you watch it, you think anybody that works for a tabloid newspaper is smarter than Boris Johnson. Anybody. They're all smarter than he is, and we absolutely ground them into the dust. But then it calmed down a bit when we shared a taxi going home. Boris and I lived about a mile down the road. And he wrote about it in the Spectator, and he said, you know, and I had a good night. They were all kind of standing around drinking before, and I just went off by myself, and I got in the zone. I just went off for a walk because I thought it's fine margins. You know, it's fine margins. When you're reaching for that buzzer, it's fine margins. And I had a good university challenge, and he wrote in the Spectator. He said, I never thought, you know, someone with that accent would destroy me and humiliate me. So he's like a terrible snob, insufferable snob. But I got to know him when we were living on the same street. I kind of felt that I did, and I do feel that, you know, I know him quite. He doesn't really have mates, you know. I mean, we were always friendly, you know. And he was a working journalist at that time. He was the motoring correspondent of GQ. So you'd
not renowned as a driver or a connoisseur of cars.
Well, I don't think he ever drove them. You know, you'd walk down the street and there'd be like a photo. Boris would be standing on a gold Bentley having his photo taken, and I don't think he loved his bicycle. You know, he loved his bicycle. He always saw him on his bike. But the thing that I really remember, you know, in the 90s, living in the early part of this century, living so close to him, is that people really did love him. People loved him. I mean, people, you know, like the Tamil newsagents and the Korean restaurant owners and the Anglo-Italian cafe owners, they would, you know, when they saw me, they'd say, "Yeah, have you seen Boris? Boris was in." You know, they really liked him, and I think he made people feel good about themselves. You know, I think he kind of spotted what do you want to hear, and he would give it to you. He was a crowd pleaser. You know, I mean, I think, you know, he ended up, you know, he treated the British public as though they were his large-breasted, dim-witted mistress. You know, on Christmas Eve, you know, being explained why you've got to spend Christmas with the wife and kids. You know, like just tell her anything. And I felt like that's the way he treated the British public. But I can remember, you know, to me he was like another journalist. He was another journalist. But he used to say to me, he just compliment me on the way I smelled, you know. And I think he thought, you know, aging boy about town. What does he want to hear? And he would say, Tony, he said, I love that puff juice you're wearing. I love it. I bet it drives the fillies wild, doesn't it? That puff juice. Let me have another sniff. And I remember saying to my son, "Don't think you can say puff juice anymore, can you? You're not allowed. You're not really allowed to say that." But he was. I think he's a great campaigner, and I think to me it's disappointing that he's so selfish and so self-centered that he's not campaigning for his party. I mean, I think if he genuinely cared about his country, genuinely cared about his party, then he'd put aside his little petty differences with Rishi and we'd be out banging the doors for him. But he's not. He's too self-obsessed, yeah.
Now, just going back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, I mean, you've been coming to Hong Kong for quite a few years. Probably no longer blowing a year's salary in a bar every time you visit here. But what is it about Hong Kong that keeps you coming? And and you mention it a lot in your books.
Yeah, I fell in love with Hong Kong at first sight. I just fell in love. I think as a lot of people in this room do and will understand. But I just can remember clearly thinking somewhere between, and like the Hong Kong that I saw doesn't exist. I mean, literally doesn't exist, because it was somewhere between Kai Tak Airport and the Dragon Bar of the old Hong Kong Hilton. And I can remember looking out. The first round of applause is for the Dragon Bar at the Hong Kong Hilton. And I can remember looking out the window and thinking, this will do me for the next 50 years. This will do me. This is all I want. This is what I want. I just really fell in love with it. And I think, I had this phone number of a law firm, Richards Butler, to go and see. And the thing is, that's a Hong Kong.
Are you in trouble already?
No, that's a Hong Kong thing, because any major city in the world, you turn up, and everybody says, "Who cares?" You come to Hong Kong and people say, "Join us," and I think that doesn't get enough credit. I think that doesn't get celebrated enough. But I didn't call this law firm because I just felt a London thing. I felt a kind of shyness about because I can remember the guy that gave it to me. He was a New Zealander, a New Zealand lawyer. You know, I can remember like some people he knew from New Zealand turned up in London and phoned him from the airport and said, "We're in England." He's like, it's like, and, you know, but he was expecting me to, so I fell in. So I was just, you know, it was, as I say, it was great boom time for travel writing. You get sent off somewhere, you know, hang out, you know, give us a couple of thousand words, and you know, pretend you're Bruce Chatwin or Jan Morris for a day. And I didn't call this number. I was just hanging out, and I fell in with some merchant seamen, and I would get the Star Ferry to join my sailor chums in the evening, and it was getting it was becoming a little bit like being on the road with Lynyrd Skynyrd. No, it was, and you know, being on the road with Lynyrd Skynyrd was kind of could be, you know, it could be fun, but suddenly the evening would take a turn. I remember being in a Holiday Inn with Lynyrd Skynyrd and in Newcastle, and they said, "Tony, those guys on the other side of the bar, they're a rugby club, something called rugby," and they think they're tough. So put down those cheese and onion crisps, because, you know, we're going to have them. And it was a bit like that with the merchant seamen. So I kind of thought, this is kind of not for me. So I went up to Richards Butler, and that's when I met my mate David Morrison. And the thing about David was, when I was a 22 or 23-year-old writer on the NME, he was a 15 or 16-year-old music fanatic in Scotland, in Aberdeen, in Macduff. And so there was an immediate bond there. And, you know, so very soon I was missing my merchant seaman pals, I can tell you. Yeah, no.
Yeah, well, you don't want to fall in with that legal crowd.
You know, and the other thing that enabled my relationship with Hong Kong is that David and David's friends, and who became my friends, really, you know, what it comes down to is they stayed.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't just come to Hong Kong for 2 years or even 20 years. You know, they stayed for a lifetime. And so that enabled me to have, you know, the Mandarin tell me that I'm on my 40th stay, the old Mandarin, my 40th stay in Hong Kong. And I don't even think of I think of the Ritz-Carlton, the old Hong Kong Hilton, as staying there more often. So, you know, but the fact that they stayed and, you know, and made their lives here and enabled really my relationship with Hong Kong. And yeah.
Did you get him a gig with the Hong Kong Tourist Board?
Yeah.
Great stand of Hong Kong.
Can't be beat.
Now then, you're still actively writing, and your regular column in The Sun now.
Yep.
I mean, it's essential reading especially for those of us who are away from Blighty.
Yeah.
I mean, and definitely, that's one thing I do Google every week, Tony Parsons, The Sun, and you'll be confronted with a few sort of home truths. Now, it's a great platform for you to show, you know, you're still very proud of a lot of things in Britain. I mean, you know, you're very much in favour of Queen Elizabeth. You wrote some great stuff about her in the past, but you don't hold back either. I mean, a couple of quotes from recent columns included, "Nothing works in strike-ravaged, cock-up-prone Britain," and "Doesn't Rishi Sunak get it? People are sick of having the new green religion stuffed down their throats."
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that's
what's good about Britain at the moment?
fair comment. Well, what's good about Britain is, I think, is what's eternally good about it. I think it's a very tolerant place. I think it's a very creative place. It's really, you know, in the course of my lifetime, it's become multiracial, multicultural in a way that you would think is impossible. You know, when if and when Rishi Sunak makes way for Keir Starmer, it will be done bloodlessly. It will be done without the kind of disgraceful, you know, affronts to democracy you saw in America, for example. You know, there'd be none of this Donald Trump stuff. So I think, and yeah, I mean, I think that's what we've got over America is we're not run by senile billionaires, I'd say that. But it does feel on just like on a daily basis, it does feel like stuff doesn't work. I've caught a lot of trains this year. And I went up to Wolverhampton to do question time. And you really, when you get a train in the UK, you honestly don't know if it's going to get there. And you have to, every train that I've got, I did a book tour for my new novel set in Cornwall. And I did a book tour in Cornwall. And you can't help but contemplate, well, what if it doesn't get me there? What if the train doesn't pull into the station, as the old blues song would have it? What's plan B? And there is that, and I think that they are removed from it. I mean, I don't, I just think anybody in that high office is removed from what's actually happening. I mean, there's a shoplifting epidemic which you can't miss. You can't miss in the UK. People are literally, because it's being effectively decriminalised, people are literally filling rucksacks with it, and it's left to people on minimum wage to enforce the law. And but if you're not witnessing it, it's difficult to comprehend that this could be happening. So, but I think they are removed. And Rishi's hanging out with Elon Musk, which is very.
What do you make of that? I mean, that's.
I don't know. I don't know. Artificial. Can't you just like unplug it? Can't you just like you would a toaster? I don't know.
Okay, well, you mentioned you were spending a lot of time down in Cornwall writing your new book, Who She Was, which is available for sale here, and Tony will scribble in the front page. And that was quite a departure from some of your other books, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, like the rest of the world, I couldn't travel for 4 years, couldn't come to Hong Kong, which, just unthinkable for me to be away from Hong Kong for so long. Just really, really missed it and pined for it, and couldn't go anywhere. But I did fall in love with Cornwall and remembered Cornwall from my childhood. And it's a lot of the great British writing is set in Cornwall. John Betjeman's poetry, finest poetry is set in Cornwall. Daphne du Maurier, Winston Graham wrote the Poldark novels. It's a great place for storytelling because you've always got that tension in Cornwall between the people who catch the lobster and the people who eat the lobster. There's that tension is always there, and it's just a fascinating place. And great beaches, great, a real working class county, a county of fishermen and miners.
Yeah, I mean, I've learnt more about lobsters from reading that book than I've ever done the millions I've spent in Wheelers and Bill Bentleys. Anyhow, let's throw this open to the floor if anybody has got any questions they'd like to ask Tony. And we'll bring you a microphone, and we've got a hand that's shot straight up over here. So, do you need a microphone? FCC member, booming voice. Yes.
I've enjoyed this so much so far.
Good.
I'm sure I'll enjoy the end. But I want to know what drew you to crime novels, and especially some of the murder mystery sorts of writings that you have done.
Yeah. What drew me to crime novels? Well, I was at a screening for a film called The Kids Are All Right, which is an Annette Bening film, which was not a bad film. And Sam Mendes invited me to this screening, and Sam Mendes felt that he wasn't involved in the film, but he felt it wasn't getting the success it deserved. So, and I don't know Sam, but he contacted me about Man and Boy. Oh, thank you very much. He contacted me about Man and Boy and saying how much he liked it, and maybe we could do something together. And I said to him, well, if that ever happened, Sam, I'd have to write it. Nobody else could write it. And then the line went dead, and I said, Sam, you're breaking up. But anyway. But he invited me to this screening, and he said, well, what are you up to? I said, just the same stuff, really, Sam. I said, what about you? And he said, I'm going to direct the new James Bond film, and I'm going to call it Skyfall. And I said, wow, that's, with hindsight, it was a great move for everybody involved. But at the time, you know, the director of American Beauty and you know, a very respected theatre director doing a Bond movie was a shock. And he said, yeah, he said the thing is, he said, I loved the novels. I loved the Ian Fleming novels. I loved the James Bond novels. He says that they were so important to me as a kid. And the way that Sam Mendes talked about the James Bond novels was exactly how I felt. I mean, I felt exactly the same way. I can remember my family driving through the mountains of Norway and my dad telling me off because I had my nose in From Russia with Love. And Sam said, so what I'm doing, I'm going to reread all the novels and then I'm going to make this film and I'm going to try and make it close to the essence of what Fleming did in the Bond novels and not make it, you know, Roger Moore and all this kind of stuff that's kind of nothing to do with these kind of quite hard, gritty novels. And I thought, wow, what a fun thing to do, to reread. Because, you know, as I say, Sam Mendes, his views on the Bond books completely echoed my own feelings and my own sentiments. And so I went back home that night and I'm going to do what Sam's doing. I'm going to reread all those Bond novels. And I, by the time I'd finished the first page of the first book, Casino Royale, I knew I wanted to write a series. I knew I wanted to write a series hero. And so then you sit down and you think, well, you know, it's got to be a detective. And then, you know, I cashed in my pension, spent a couple of years just thinking about it. What would he be like? And I wanted him to be, you know, I quite like The Man Alone. Figure the Jack Reacher, the James Bond. I quite like that, but that's not my thing. So I knew I wanted him to not be a man alone. I knew I wanted him to have a family, but at the same time, I didn't want him to be domesticated. So I wanted him to have a family. So you know, and I knew Scotland Yard kind of felt like a cliche to me. So, but I remembered writing this story back in the 80s about the Vice Squad in West End Central. Yep. I remember the time I spent in West End Central, and then then it just kind of came together, and it was, and you know, and I discussed it with my wife because it was like it was funded by my pension plan. It was like funded by.
Wow, it's quite a risk. I mean, so this.
No, it's a nutty thing to do. No, it's a nutty thing to do.
You wouldn't recommend it?
I wouldn't recommend it. No, I wouldn't because if it fails, it's just too catastrophic. Yeah. But I kind of felt I kind of felt really, really strongly that I could do it well, and I felt that it could be a success. But you're never certain. You're never ever certain. So you know, I took a year just thinking about it, and a year to write it, and it cost like £250,000 that I had to fund myself, and I did, and I talked it over seriously with my wife, saying, you know, when the money's gone, it's gone, and there's no guarantee. But I kind of feel, and she said, yeah, I got faith in you. You know, I got faith in you. Do it.
But this character that you created, Detective Max Wolfe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's quite a few bits of you in there, aren't there?
Yeah, I kind of felt
he loves boxing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that you have to plug in the stuff that works best is when it's filtered through something true. Yeah. Something that's true, and it doesn't. And you know, my my daughter, who's 21 now, she was just starting to go to big school when I started Max Wolfe, and I kind of really missed when she was little. I kind of really missed her when she was like 2, 3, 4, 5. I missed her as a little girl because she was growing up fast, and so I used that kind of nostalgia. And it's kind of nostalgia is the wrong word. It's more like a yearning for a time that's gone and is never going to come again. So it's come from somewhere true, but also at the same time you're thinking, you know, millions of people bought my novel Man and Boy. Millions of people bought it, and I knew that a lot of the thing that they responded to was that because they recognised things in their own life, so that, you know, when people were moved, they were not necessarily moved by the death of my father, but the remembrance of the death of their own father or their own mother, you know, and they because we all go through the same stuff at different periods of our lives. So I just kind of, you know, so on like a, you know, so it was carefully, and I'd been doing it for a while. When I took this big gamble, and it was you know, because it could have easily, there could have been some kind of, you know, economic crash in the publishing industry. I mean, as it turned out, we sold the book in 24 hours, went to #1 on the Sunday Times list, you know, so it paid off. It paid off. But it was, when I look back, I do think it's, but it, you know, it extended my career for, you know, sometimes you just have to bite down on your gum shield, you know, and like hang in there, you know, and wait for something good to happen. And I think if you do good work, then good things happen eventually. They're not always the things that you expect to happen.
Another question?
Lady there.
Yes. Right.
Oh, thanks very much, Tony. That was terrific listening to you because, of course, you were describing, in terms of what you were describing about the music world was when I was growing up and whatever. So you talked about that a lot of these bands you were meeting, like the Jam or wherever, were just like kids you could have met at school. So, you know, we all kind of felt the same. But you think about that time, it was drug-fueled, it was alcohol-fueled and whatever else. But I've just been reading, you know, Jada Pinkett Smith's just brought out this new book or whatever, and I was listening to this interview that she was doing. And one of her best friends was Tupac Shakur, the whatever, you know, who was gunned down at age 25, you know, a limousine pulled up next to his limousine and shot through the window and everything. It's quite horrifying to think. I'm totally unfamiliar with that world, but it seems to me that the world that you were describing, that I was kind of growing up in, although it had all these things going on, in some ways there was an innocence about you, stumbled into these things. But what is the world like today in these people that sort of make, you know, this trajectory from zero to being these great big stars and things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was curiously innocent. You know, I think it was a curiously innocent time, although it was, you know, it was that period was when the world was post-pill and pre-AIDS. And there was this tiny little window. It was like when we thought, well, there's two things that are never going to kill you. That's sex and drugs. That's two things we don't have to worry about, you know. And we didn't have guns, thank God. We don't have to worry about that. But it was curiously innocent. And you know, there's been so many sexual scandals in the UK. And from like light entertainers, comedians, you know, and of course, you know, Harvey Weinstein and Hollywood and all that. But that kind of debauched world that I was in, that world of, you know, Mick and Keith and Johnny Rotten and Thin Lizzy, that world of sex and drugs and rock and roll, nobody ever complains about that. And I have to say that, you know, and I saw some wild stuff over the years, but I never saw any coercion. I never saw any sexual bullying. I never saw any of that. And I'm, you know, if someone was interested, they'd come and knock on your door, you know. And if they weren't, then they'd knock on the drummer's door, you know. But there was kind of the ultimate insult, really, the ultimate put down, really. But it was it's curious, and I just think of like, you know, it's like, you know, we were these like kind of innocent children, you know, rutting in the golden fields of Eden, you know, out of our minds on God knows what, yeah.
Right, we've got another question at the front here, this side here, then we'll jump to the other.
Tony, first of all, thank you so much for coming back to Hong Kong. Please stay.
Okay.
Forever, ideally, but I grew up with your journalism across, back in the old day, NME and Face and Arena and GQ, and that taught me everything. Being a lad, and then a new lad, and then a man, and a husband, and father, son, nephew. But you've tilted towards fiction, and I'm curious about, you have things to say. Journalism, fiction. How's it work for you?
I always felt that I couldn't rely on just one. I always felt that, and you know, experience has told me that, you know, it's wrong to put your faith in just one discipline. You know, I really admired Keith Waterhouse, the way he moved from journalism to fiction to plays, and I've tried to do. I haven't done it with the success he's done. I haven't you know, had such a broad range. But yeah, to me, it's all communicating, and I enjoy all of it. I wouldn't like just writing novels. I wouldn't like to just be in a room. You know, it's you know, Martin Amis said the thing about journalism is it gets you out of the house. And it does, it does. And I think that's good for you. And I think that they feed into each other. They feed into each other. I think there's the practical fact that I'm getting paid by News UK and also Penguin Random House. And if something falls through, I'm still getting paid by one of them. So there's that, there's that working man's just basic pragmatism, and that you can't really trust these people to look after you forever. But I actually think that they feed off each other, and I think it's a healthy thing to do. And I think journalism teaches you brevity, clarity, discipline, and that all helps with, because you see, I'm not at this level as a novelist, but you can see someone like J.K. Rowling or Stephen King. No one dares to edit them. No one dares to say to J.K. Rowling, you know what, Joanne, this would be a terrific novel if it was half its length, chuck it. And, they would be out. The idea, just the possibility of offending J.K. Rowling. As I understand it, I know a few people who know her, and actually agent was a neighbour of mine. She seems like a decent woman, but at the same time, nobody dares say to Stephen King, too much waffle, So I'm kind of, I think it all helps each other. And, you don't know how long. My mum's brothers were hot metal printers, and they lost their jobs when Rupert Murdoch moved to Wapping. Their hot metal printers had their run, and some of my uncles were in their 60s, some of them were in their 40s, never really worked again. And I used to think that there was something, specific about my uncles, that time and technology had overtaken them. But now I see that can happen to absolutely anyone. That can happen to absolutely anyone. We're all capable of being that, that blacksmith who thinks, well, people are always going to need horseshoes, just as like the Model T Ford comes puttering over the horizon. We're all capable of being in that position, and we probably will be. So on a practical level, I think on a creative level, they help each other, and I see terrific journalists, fantastic journalists, and I think, why aren't they trying to write a novel? Well, I don't understand why they're not trying to. And I think the answer is, it's the reason most of us are stopped from doing things in life is the fear of failure. Because there is always that possibility that you're going to fall flat on your face. And I think that's why. But I see fantastic writers who think, I'd love to see what he did over 100,000 words, or she did over 100,000 words. And but it takes a bit of. It's largely an act of will, I think. I think especially fiction is largely an act of will. When J.K. Rowling was sending out the first Harry Potter manuscript, she got a dozen knockbacks, and she was a single parent writing in Starbucks. The smart thing to do would be to jack it in. Stop punishing yourself. It's just not going to happen. But she didn't, and I think it's largely that. And I think that success is largely determined by how we respond to failure and setbacks. And so I just kind of like having them all as an insurance, and you don't know when one of them's going to stop.
Yes, we got a question there, and then we'll go to Matthew over there, and then we'll look to begin to wrap up. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Tony. You seem to be fairly lucky with the editors that you've had over your long career, from the NME, Piers Morgan. You even met Charlie Wilson. Are there any that you may have had a clash with or not got on with? Or I'm obviously looking for a nice anecdote to cheer me up.
Now, what I think is that you're at one of the things you have to manage in a 50-year career. We all want a good 50-year career. It's in 2026 it'll be 50 years since I joined the NME. 50 years ago sounds like it should be the Battle of the Somme, but it's when I was watching Iggy Pop take his enormous cock out, So it's like, it feels like it should be. Surely that was the first Battle of the Somme, wasn't it? No, that was Iggy Pop's penis. So what I think is, when I've had good editors, You know, I had a great editor, Nick Logan at the NME, Piers Morgan at the Mirror. The guy that bought Man and Boy was a guy called Nick Sayers at HarperCollins. Nobody else was interested in Man and Boy. Absolutely nobody was interested in it in London. And Nick Sayers said, this book will do okay in hardback, and in paperback, it will sell millions. And he absolutely called it. And what happened with all my good editors is they all move on. They all move on. They all, you know, Piers got fired. Nick Logan was burned out. Nick Logan, you know, he was dealing with this like crazy, everybody was like under the age of 25. Everybody was out of their mind on drugs. There were like knockdown fights in the office, you know, it was like, you know, just absolute screaming mayhem. People, you know, having DTs, being dragged off to rehab. It was complete madness. And Nick, at 29, Nick said, oh, I'm out of here. I'm going to start my own magazine. You know, so I've been lucky with having great editors, but they've all moved on, and it's never the same. You know, I didn't particularly get on with the guy that replaced Nick Logan at the NME at all, but I got on with the guy that replaced Piers at the Mirror, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't quite, you know, Piers believed in me. Piers really believed in me. Piers got it. Piers had grown up with me, you know, and that's an incredibly powerful thing. So I think you have to manage these things. I think that when that happens, and I never really found another newspaper editor like that. And also, I never could, because Piers Morgan was the guy that I spoke to when my mum's coffin was being taken out of the house. So I can never, there's nothing that can happen that'll be, you know, that will be as profound as that to me. So, you know, I think that, you know, just be grateful for the great editors, but don't expect, when they go, it's not going to be the same. It'll never be the same. Yeah.
Matthew.
Today, when young people write to you asking for advice about what they should do with their futures, what do you tell them?
Well, I don't think that my career is possible now. I don't think that it's possible to have exactly the career that I've had. You know, because the NME was a very powerful magazine. Even now it's still going, but it's not what it was, but it was still going. Even during my wilderness years, magazines were booming. You know, there were arts programs on I did an arts program on the BBC for 6 years. And that's not there anymore. So I'd avoid journalism. I mean, when people say they want to be a journalist,
Thanks for saying that in the FCC.
Yeah, well, no. If people want to be a journalist, that, you know, there's just not the network of magazines, and, you know, it's kind of managed decline. It's you know, it's like, you know, being a journalist is like saying I want to work for the British Empire. We're saying, well, you know, you're 100 years too late. You know, you know. So I think if you really want to do it, if you really believe in it, if you really think, and then there's other ways of doing it. You know, if you want to do it, you know, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of social media. I'm not you know, I'm too old. It's not my generation. It's not my thing. I think it's distracting. I think it stops people reading books. I think it stops people having a good time. I think it's a waste of time. You know, largely. You know, I'm really just there. I'm there for the, you know, the amusing dogs and to flog a few books, and that's it for me. You know, and if you, I also think that you have to find a way to make it work for yourself and in your own time. You know, that good writing will always be valued. You know, good writing will, and I look at newspapers now, and I look at, you know, there are incredible sports writers that still work for the national newspapers. Unbelievable guys like Martin Samuel, Dave Kidd, Oliver Holt, fantastic writers who, you know, a lot of people have never heard of, but they should be like really lionize these guys. And yet, newspapers are in decline. You know, we're in. It's not so different. You know, what happened to my uncles as printers is happening to me as a journalist, but it's more delayed. You know, it's not happening overnight. It's a long drawn out thing. So I would just be honest with them, saying that the career that I had, you know, you're not gonna, you know, if you want to do it, great, but you're not gonna be taking drugs with Debbie Harry. Okay, so forget about it.
Right, last question, and then we'll, this one there, thanks. Then we'll do
Very much enjoying the talk. It's brilliant. One question. You actually, I read an interview where you touched on you mentioned Boris Johnson. You touched on your voting preferences. You actually, at one stage, you said you were leaning towards UKIP. I wondered if that is still in the frame. And the second question, quick one, is how long did it take you to your record for the enemy crossword? What was it?
Oh, I never attempted the enemy crossword.
Really?
I never tried the enemy crossword. No, I think that, I mean, I understand why you asked about UKIP. I understand why Brexit happened. I understand why it happened. I understand that, British people, it was largely a class issue. And coming from the working class, I understood it, and I was sympathetic to it. And I think it's failed. I think it's failed. I think if you're kind, you could say it's failing. But I understand why a lot of people were really. You can't tell a country that hasn't been invaded for 1,000 years. You can't tell that country that the German Chancellor will decide your immigration policy. You just can't tell them that. You can't tell them that. And I think that if the working class, and it was largely a class issue, if they'd been treated with a bit more respect. I remember Gordon Brown, who I did know, and I remember Gordon Brown saying about Mrs. Gillian Duffy, who was an old Labour supporter, and she said, "Well, what about all these East Europeans that are coming over here?" And she was talking about changes in working class communities. She was talking about people not being able to access, their GP and all that, and just, all that stuff. And she was clearly she was clearly his constituency. She was the kind of woman that he should have been trying to placate and explain to and respect more than anything. And he dismissed her as a bigoted woman. And as soon as he did that, I said to everybody, if there's ever a referendum, it's only going one way. And I think it's failed. And I think that, one of the tensions between me and my newspaper now, personally, is that I feel, that it's kind of the great unsayable. You're not allowed to say that, And when people say Brexit has been a success, what they say two things. They say, our vaccine rollout beat the rest of Europe. And I think that's true. But I also think you can't hide behind that forever. And the other thing they say is, we gave unconditional, unequivocal support for Ukraine when they had an unprovoked invasion that precipitated the worst ground war in Europe since 1945. And I don't think that is true. I think that the British would, their sense of justice and fair play is such that, and democracy is such that they would have always supported the Ukrainian people. So, so it's still to be, it's possible that every revolution fails. Every revolution fails. And that one, I would say, it's difficult to paint it as a success, and I wouldn't attempt to.
Okay, on that note, we're going to... Oh,
this gentleman.
Just one quick one. Come on, it's a good question you did kicked off with, so I'll let you finish.
Okay, I started, I'll end. One question. Is there a Hong Kong novel in your future?
I always felt that I hadn't earned the right to write a Hong Kong novel. That I didn't understand it enough. That the novel that I wrote after Man and Boy, One for My Baby, was set in Hong Kong. It's about someone that comes back from Hong Kong, and that was kind of my way of doing it, but sort of one step removed. That I'm not, But I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever write a great Hong Kong. I know I'll always love Hong Kong. That's the most I can say.
Well, and you've always earned your place at the FCC whenever you come back. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Parsons.
Thank you.
And we never let anybody leave without, I don't know, I think it's an FCC mug.
Oh,
there you
fantastic. I thought I'd get honorary membership at least. I should never have said that journalism is over. Yeah.
Well, we very much look forward to having you back here. Tony will sign copies of his book, which are available over there. As I say, it's a great read. And then also, I'm certainly ready to buy you a drink downstairs if you'd care to come and meet the broader membership.
Can I just say it's been such an honour and a joy to come to this legendary place and spend the night with you. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate. Really appreciate it. Thank you.